Ladies and gentlemen, it's a pleasure to welcome you today to our event on the electrification revolution. The purpose of this session is to bring to life how electrification is transforming the economy and the exciting opportunities that are emerging as a result. The scale of this transformation is huge. By 2030, we'll have invested more than $24 trillion of capex on electrification. By 2050, 70% of the economy will be electrified. This is disrupting value chains, shifting profit pools, and giving rise to innovative business models and solutions. The transition has already picked up considerable speed, but there is more to do by policymakers, investors, and corporates. At Lombardier, we believe that investors have a key role to play to accelerate the transition and benefit from the promising investment opportunities it is unlocking. We set up Holistic a few months ago as part of our commitment to this ambition. Holistic is a dedicated, sustainable investment platform that sits within Lombardier Investment Managers and which is powered by a strong partnership with the systems change firm Systemic. Holistic's mission is to drive large-scale capital investment to shape a net-zero, nature-positive economy. As the transition unfolds, we seek to invest where new profit pools emerge, where new market value is created. At the heart of Holistic, you will find a robust, science-based research team. We have to keep in mind that the transition is a complex issue. It requires a system-thinking approach that goes beyond the typical industrial clusters that we know. Today, you will hear more about Holistic's research on electrification before moving to a discussion among our talented panelists to hear different industry perspectives. With that, I will hand over to Michael Urban, who is the Chief Strategist at Holistic, who will set the scene for us on electrification. Thank you, Michael.
Thank you very much, Jean-Pascal. Good afternoon to you all. Thanks a lot for joining us. Within the next 10 minutes, I have the task of trying to set the stage for the panel, who have actually been tasked of answering that question of, is it the greatest opportunity of the history of capitalism? Question mark. Somewhat provocative, but hopefully thought-provoking. Just to set the stage, I wanted to share a few words about the climate as well as the policy and the economic backdrop to the energy system transformation. Now, just taking a step back and just quickly describe the environmental transition through essentially what we think are three main system changes. There's an energy system transition. This is what we'll talk about for the duration of this session. But there's also a land and ocean transformation, which is ultimately about transforming our food systems and getting our food systems back in tune with nature in order to give nature its regenerative properties back. There's also material system transformation, which ultimately is about circular economy and decoupling our growth model from primary resource extraction and use. There's a lot of intersection between those three system changes, as we know. The energy system transformation is actually going to be materials intensive, and there are circular economy principles that apply to the energy system transition as well. Now, when we talk about the electrification of the global economy, we're really talking about this energy system transformation across, I think, three main key characteristics, three takeaways. The first one is that electricity is poised to be the dominant energy vector of the future, going from about 20% today to about 70% plus in 2050, of final energy demand under a net zero scenario. The flip side of that, of course, is a significant degrowth in the final energy demand that is coming from fossil fuels. And the third point, perhaps less obvious on this chart, is actually final energy demand is set to degrow ever so slightly. That is measured in terms of exojoule, actual energy consumption. And that is because electrification, direct and indirect electrification, is unlocking massive efficiency gains. This scenario actually takes into account an economy that grows in size, actually doubles over time, all the way to 2050, and yet final energy demand is set to decline thanks to efficiency gains. Now, we've seen it many times before. Transitions tend to follow a pattern, especially when they're innovation-based. At first, things happen slowly, and then they take off all at once, surprising many, including financial market participants. And in this case, there's a set of conditions that we think is essentially provoking this perfect storm, provoking this tipping point of exponential growth and adoption of electrification solutions. On the innovation front, we have the vast majority of the innovation that underpin the electrification of the energy system. Policy action is at an all-time high. I'll come back to this point in a moment. This has the effect of de-risking private capital deployment, which is now chasing new sources of green revenues, new sources of green profits at speed and scale. As capital deployment expands, production capacity increases, and that tends to unlock economies of scale, in some instances, pretty drastic ones. This is ultimately what is unlocking this green growth story, and it very much sits at the foundation of what could potentially be a great investment opportunity, as well as a dramatic progress towards achieving our climate objectives. Now, when it comes to a tipping point, there's essentially three foundational conditions. The first one has to do with costs, and costs need to be at parity, if not more competitive than incumbent solutions. We've seen it over the last 10 years. The cost of wind, solar, and battery technologies have dropped between 60 and 90%, a pretty drastic cost decline. Where it gets really potent is when you combine that cost decline with on par or better actual functional performance. And we see this for heat pumps versus gas boilers, 3 times more efficient. We also see this for electric motors versus internal combustion engine, about 3 times more efficient. Those efficiency gains is precisely what is unlocking that actual reduction in final energy demand as measured as exojoule. Now, combining better costs and better performance means increasing adoption. It's all of a sudden very compelling on an economic basis for consumers and businesses. That means rising adoption rates and, as a reinforcing mechanism, an increasing accessibility across markets. I was mentioning policy support. It's unprecedented. When we look across the European Green Deal, the Inflation Reduction Act in the US, and China, we forecast over 100 billions, multiple times 100 billions a year being deployed by government, either through direct or indirect support to support that transition. Now, when we talk about electrification, we're ultimately talking about a fundamental rethink of the energy system, moving away from what's described on screen here, which is a heavily centralized system that rests essentially on a handful of petrostates, heavily centralized and unidirectional, essentially based on and founded upon extraction, transformation, and burning of fossil fuel, and therefore is wasteful. I was mentioning the inefficiencies of the fossil fuel-based system, and also creates a vast amount of emissions. Moving away from that system towards a system that's increasingly, this time, decentralized, the capacity to produce renewable energy in multiple locations across the globe, but also increasingly bidirectional, the capacity for consumers to also be producers of energy and selling overproduced energy back to the grid, and of course, massively cleaner and massively more efficient. Now, Jean-Pascal mentioned just a moment ago that this is going to be a huge investment on the part of corporates and global economies. The forecast is about 24.5 trillion over the course of this decade. That's, of course, energy is one of the most capex-intensive areas of the economy, and there's something to be said about the current macro environment. But it's important to remember that this is not just wishful thinking that's sort of pushed onto a distant future. Already back in 2022, we've seen clean tech capex at about 1 trillion, outpacing capex going into the maintenance of oil and gas infrastructure at around 800 billion. The reason ultimately capital expenditure is shifting is because now corporates are seeing future sources of green revenues, future sources of green profits, and they want to chase those future sources of profits through upfront investment. And here is an important point about electrification. For all the talk about renewables, wind and solar, which of course is an important part of the equation, actually electrification spans a much larger set of the global economy. It starts actually with the electrification of demand, with 3 chapters: electrification of mobility, of large industrial processes, and last but not least, the built environment. Alone, the electric vehicle market is said to be about $1.7 trillion US market in revenue terms by 2030, growing at approximately 19% a year. Now, that electrification of demand is really what's providing a massive boost in economic terms for the electrification of supply. And that's really because that demand-side electrification is now asking for renewables mainly on economic terms. It's simply cheaper to consume renewables, with solar now being the cheapest source of energy worldwide. That's creating a case for power generation, but also for storage, for intermittent sources of energy like wind and solar. And last but not least, there's a whole chapter about enablers. Sort of upstream of the value chain, think about all the materials that are required to electrify the global economy: copper, lithium, but also some high value add component manufacturing, power electronics. We'll hear about that a lot more during the panel. And of course, a whole flip side of that equation, which is the degrowth and the inherent risks attached to that degrowth with fossil fuel related technologies. So just to end this intervention with a grounded perspective and an investment perspective on where do we see the opportunity in equity markets, in particular related to electrification. The first point that I think is worth making is that this is not just about utilities and power generation, right? And we know actually, as a matter of fact, that this is a sector that had a difficult time in financial markets over the last couple of months with raising interest rates. There's also a swath of opportunity with not long duration assets, but actually sectors that are related to information technologies with consumer discretionary. I was mentioning the rise of electric vehicles, semiconductors and IT, as well as in materials. Generally, in geographic terms, there seems to be an edge with Europe over the United States, but that is also something that I'm looking forward to hear more about, hopefully during the panel. Now, lastly, why do we think this is so attractive is when we look actually at how the market is valuing electrification-related companies, they're more or less on par with the broader equity market. And yet, when we look at that subset, in terms of their capital efficiency, so return on equity typically, as well as maintenance free cash flow, it's significantly higher, and actually also offers up to twice the growth. So same valuation for up to twice the growth is something that should be a no-brainer to most equity investors. But with that, I'm now inviting my colleague, Matia Romani, who's going to moderate the panel, and I very much look forward to the discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Michael, if I can please invite the panelists to join me on stage. Thank you very much. I'm Matia Romani. I'm a partner at Systemic, and I work with Michael on Holistic, the partnership between Systemic and Lombard Odier. My panelists are being shy. Why are you being shy? Come on up. Thank you, Augustine. Thank you. $25 trillion of investment in the last 7 years. That's something. If you sort of compare it to the overall investment into the OECD, this would bring investments level as a percentage of GDP back to the levels we saw maybe 30 or 40 years ago. So maybe it's the end of the secular stagnation, and electrification will do that trick to us. I have an incredible panel to help us answer this question, which comprises experts and entrepreneurs and corporate executives from all walks of life. I encourage you to read their bios on your app so that we don't waste time introducing them one by one. And I'd like to first turn to Camilla. She's the CEO of the Kyoto group. So tell us, salty batteries. What is that you do?
We are electrifying the industry. And I need to bring a topic which we have not yet heard about, that half of the energy demand in the world is heat. And we almost don't talk about that. And if you look at the industry, 2/3 of a plant, the energy demand is heat. They don't need so much electricity. And all of that today is almost entirely produced by fossil fuel. There is a gas boiler producing that heat in that plant. And there is technology available to replace that gas boiler. And the technology is available today. And it's proven and it's scalable. So that's what I would like to bring to the attention, and that's what we are doing. I'm representing a company called Kyoto Group, who is a technology provider. We are electrifying that heat production in the industry with a more or less plug-and-play solution where you replace that gas boiler and you put a solution there that provides that from electricity. And it comes with a storage, which means that you can utilize and charge that battery when there is electricity available or when it's cheap. In many, many countries in the world, such as our first installation is in Denmark. And there's lots of overproduction from offshore wind, typically during the night, when people are sleeping, plants are closed, but there are lots of wind. Then we charge our battery, and we get paid to charge our battery, because we take down that electricity from the grid. And when the plant wakes up in the morning, we sell it to the plant. So we get paid to charge, and we get paid to sell it. So
that's not a bad business model. I quite like it. That's great, fabulous. And can I ask you a question? What are the biggest obstacles you're facing? Why don't I have one of those batteries in my house?
I have to say that industry is working on that. So the problem is speed and sense of urgency. We saw a sense of urgency related to the unfortunate event of Russia invading Ukraine and the gas prices spiking. Then there was a sense of urgency in the industry. Everyone wanted to decarbonize. And then we got that a bit under control, and we were able to build a gas inventory and get the prices down. And then the sense of urgency disappeared a bit, but it's not gone. The industry is working to decarbonize.
Thank you, Camila. Agustin Salgado Martin, you are in charge of innovation at Iberdrola. So it'd be very interesting to follow up from phenomenal entrepreneurial spirit of Camila and Camila's company. What is a large company like Iberdrola doing to help us understand how electrification can change our lives?
Yeah, sure. Take into account what we have seen before in the presentation. We have been very successful in the last decades to decarbonize the power sector. And I think we are in exponential growth of using renewables in our power sector. So the problem, not the problem, but the challenge that we have today, it is how to transfer all these renewables into the demand side. Because we can decarbonize the power sector, but power is only 25% of the energy used today. 75%, 80% is fossil fuel. So if we don't help customers to fuel switch, then we will keep this 80% of fossil fuels in the demand side, and we are not going to be able to decarbonize. So there are like three sectors in the economy when we talk about energy: that is transportation, it's residential, and it's industry. We have heard a nice story about industry. In fact, We have invested a small amount of shares in Kyoto to help our customers to decarbonize their processes. And what we are trying to do right now, it is, apart from growing our base of installed base of renewables, it is trying to help our customers for this decarbonization. We have created alliances for heavy-duty transportation electrification. We have created an alliance for maritime transportation. We are creating an alliance for heat electrification. And we are trying to create business models that will show that the fuel switching is profitable for the customers. Because when you talk to the customers, they say, yes, nice, I want to decarbonize, but the cost of my process is cheaper, you have fossil fuels. So now we have to create the business models to show them that they can save money. And I'm sure we can do that in this decade. It's a case for electric vehicles that will be soon there. It's the case for some industrial processes that will be soon there. And it's the case for residentials that will be soon there. So the real challenge this decade, and I'm finishing with that, it is to convince the demand side to fuel switch in an economic way that also fulfill our environmental commitments.
That's fantastic, Agustin. I tell you, that's why I'm saying this panel is phenomenal. You got all the answers on the panel, because right after you, we have Vincent Minier from Schneider Electric. You're the demand. You're building the equipment, which is actually moving us away from having to combust fossil fuels to consuming power to achieve what we need to achieve. So I'm going to take you slightly off track from the question that we thought we'd tackle and ask you, what is Schneider Electric doing to help Agustin make sure that his carbon-free power can go into those efficient processes and eventually deliver better services and cheaper services to consumers?
Thank you. Yes, Schneider Electric is a technology provider and an advisory service boutique about decarbonization and electrification. And basically, the tagline is digital for sustainability. What does that mean? It means that we are helping all our customers on all end-use sectors to decarbonize. So obviously, it goes through clean electrification, okay, renewable plus electrification of processes, and it comes also with efficiency, which encompass energy efficiency and circularity, as you mentioned earlier. I think we are not looking enough at circularity, and circularity will have a big impact in the future. Regarding digital, I'd like to make a point here. No digital, no transition. You need to manage variability of renewable. You need to manage, for example, how do you make your electrification of processes react to the price of electricity? If your process, if agile, you can play directly with the electricity. If not, you need some storage as an absorber, I would say. So very interesting. So I think there is no bad customer. We just need to help all our customers to decarbonize. And I said it's much more efficient and it's beneficial to the customer. We just released a study at Schneider Electric Sustainability Research Institute, where we show that in a building, in any type of geography, in any type of building segment, you can reduce by 3 the CO2 emission and reduce by 2 or 3 the energy bill, which is becoming electricity bill. When you deploy heat pumps, you deployed management system, you deployed PV and storage when needed. When you do all this integration, it can work only if it's digital and you maximize your efficiency to the benefits of the consumer, but also the society, because when you optimize at, I would say, behind the meter, by, for example, smart charging, you can release the stresses that you would have put on the grid. So it's an accelerator of the transition. And we will need both investment in grids, I mean in copper, if I would say, and digitization. The nice thing about digitization, it allows to go fast in the very short term, as we have obviously issues in permitting. And I will stop here.
Wow. Okay. You stopped on a big point, though, which is the issue of permitting, which is massive. But look, thank you very much. So what we had so far is that some incredible innovation. The supply of energy is decarbonizing really quick, and the supply of power is decarbonizing very quick. But demand is still not there, and we need to build up demand. Kristen Palenari, you had at the World Economic Forum all the work on energy transformation, really. So tell us what you're learning from talking to your industry members about how the value chains are being transformed by these new opportunities, and whether you think that transformation will bring in the demand that Agustin wants to meet with his carbon-free power.
Yeah, a lot of our stakeholders are really shifting from thinking about value chains to looking at the broader ecosystem, because as we saw in the slide presentations earlier, it's really complex. We can look at the value chain from materials all the way to consumers, but then we're missing out on, the impact of policies, the evolving landscape of policy, depending on which market you're operating in, workforce. I think that the workforce skills gap is something that's going to impact stakeholders, whether you're in industry or government, trying to take advantage of these opportunities and optimize on these opportunities. So if that's not addressed, we're not going to be able to advance on transforming the demand side. We're not going to be able to advance even on building out the grid that's needed on the supply side. And then there's many other factors from the materials supply, which I'm sure there's a lot of conversations here at this conference about that, as well as land constraints. And I think that the land constraints is something that, it's definitely on the supply side, but it's something that more and more stakeholders are talking about. It's really impacting the ability to roll out projects at a large scale, the infrastructure that's needed to get to that 70% plus electrification. Because of the land constraints, there's a lot of backlash from people, depending on which markets you're in, of course. And so we're seeing that NIMBYism, we're seeing the backlash from conservation groups. And so taking a much more people positive and nature positive approach is also something that is in this complex ecosystem. So sort of a long answer, but it's so much more complex than just the value chain shift. It's that shift to really broad ecosystem thinking.
Oh, okay. We're hoping to get the simplicity from you, but what you're saying is that this is complicated, and your industry members are finding it difficult to navigate these new ecosystems as the changes go way beyond value chains. That's very interesting. Let me turn, last but not least, Kingsmill Bond, Rocky Mountain Institute, one of the leading think tanks on the transformation of energy systems. Help us understand how this is playing out in different geographies. Of course, Rocky Mountain Institute is based in the US, but you guys work globally. How are these changes playing out in different geographies, in different contexts?
Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak. So just before I plunge into how it's working differently in different locations, I want to make a couple of comments, if I may, about the energy transition in general, which we haven't necessarily talked about thus far. The first point is we have to realize that electricity is now the largest source of useful energy. I use the word useful specifically. If you take Rystad data, it's bigger than oil. Furthermore, it's the only piece of the energy system that's growing. Everything else has peaked, and electricity is the only piece that's growing. And the third sort of general point I think is really important to bear in mind is that what's electricity going after? It's going after the giant rents of the fossil fuel system. That's the fact that it costs Saudi Arabia $10 to get oil out of the ground, and they sell it for $100. That's that $90 rent. Add it all up, it's 2,000 billion euros a year. That's what the electrification, that's the opportunity for the electrification. So we face lots of barriers, but we have one enormous, great, fat target, which is the huge rents going to the fossil fuel system. And then I think the other great aspect of the electrification story we need to think about is, as Michael said earlier, it's 3 times more efficient, at least, than anything the fossil system can do, quite apart from not trashing the planet. So it has so many spectacular advantages. So then when it comes to the second part of the question, who's leading and who are the leaders and laggards? Well, as you would expect, you know, the leaders, it's Scandinavia, California, and China. And what's happening in this, as in so many other transitions, is you're getting the leaders blazing a path, and then everyone else follows. And one of the mistakes that people make is they look at the laggards and they say, change is not happening in Russia. And the answer is, it doesn't matter. You've got to look at the leaders. So I think it's really important to look at these leading states and see how quickly change is happening there. And look at how change is happening to sales, not to stocks. That is to say, the car sales, not the car fleet. And then that brings me on to, if I may, a couple of final points. What's interesting right now is how quickly change is happening, how quickly electrification is happening. So there are 3 vectors to the energy transition. The first vector is the decarbonization of electricity. It's all that wonderful solar and wind, which has kind of been happening for a while. This second vector, this electrification story we're here to talk about today, is where it goes from, well, from your numbers 20 to 70, from other numbers 40 to 90, but whatever, nevertheless goes up a lot. That has taken a lot longer to get to price parity, but it's going to happen much faster. And so it took a long time for EVs to get to price parity in China, for example. Now they're there, and they're going to be at price parity in every single major market in the world by the end of this decade. And what that means is that we're going to see, actually, the electrification story play out even more rapidly than we saw the decarbonization story play out in the electricity sector. And it's going to be led by the extraordinary speed of growth of electric vehicles, pioneered in Norway and then Scandinavia and now China, and then sort of spreading to Europe and eventually the United States and the rest of the world. And then final point I make about really interesting electrification stories that are happening right now. Everyone talks about how hard it is to decarbonize heavy industry. This is true, but it's very easy, or relatively easy, to decarbonize light industry, and that's enormous. So if you look at what's going on in China, Chinese light industry is electrifying so quickly that it has driven a peak in global fossil fuel demand in industry in 2014. And all of the growth since 2014 in the industrial sector has in fact come from electricity specifically driven by the electrification of Chinese light industry. So we struggle in Europe. We're not yet doing that. I don't know why, but it's amazing how quickly things are changing where they are changing, and we need to bear that in mind.
Well, thank you very much, Kingsmill. And I think Camilla was very happy to hear this last point, because that's a business. So look, I mean, what we're saying is that 3 times as efficient, we're going after rents, enormous rents, which are now captured by the fossil fuel industry. The supply is there. We should be done. And yet, you look at markets, stock markets, over the last 2 months, and everything electrification has taken a massive beating. So why is the market, the stock market, the public equity market, why is it not there yet? What are the gaps? What's going on? Who wants to tell us? Augustine, I'll ask you.
Yeah, sure. When we talk about markets, we can talk about the stock markets, or we can talk about real markets, physical markets. So it's true that the global investments, and we have seen that in the presentation before, in renewables are today higher than the global investments in fossil fuel industries. And just think about that. 5 years ago, it was crazy. Here in Geneva, we have the World Economic Forum, and we have had conversations about this. 5-10 years ago, it was like, no, it's not possible. It was only a niche, or it's a piece. It's only for Europeans and these kind of guys. So now today, real markets, real investments, and so on, today are higher, and they are growing, while, as Kingsmill has said, they are going down. So it's true that the investments, one of the characteristics of this energy transition is that you need a lot of capex and very low variable cost. So when you have high interest rates in this sector, then the money flows not for these high capex investments sometimes, or the companies who are doing them, but to the bonds, and that's all. But this doesn't mean that we are slowing the level of investments. This means that this is only a time period in which, because of that, we are facing this. But the truth it is that technology costs are going down, and you look at the cost of PV modules that has gone down 40% in 5 months. The cost of wind energy also going down because bigger machines, the cost of electric vehicles, the cost of batteries for storage. So the trend is in those capex to go down. At some points, the interest rates will come down again, and the investments will again be very massive. And the other thing is that when we have seen a decrease in cost in technology, looks like that the investment didn't go up so much. But the reason for that, it is that the capex went down. That's if you look at the massive installations of power, of renewable power, it's exponential curves. So, and sometimes it's difficult to understand what exponential curves mean, but the change in the energy sector that we are facing in these years is exponential, and this means that we want to be faster because we need to be faster, but I can tell you, from a company that has been in the industry for many years, this is very, very fast. This is very, very fast.
Anybody else on this?
No, just quickly, on our side, I would say as a tech company, we are really seeing a strong momentum on decision of investment from end users to decarbonize. So I would say our share was not so impacted as a tech provider, but it's not the pool of companies. But really, the momentum is great, at least on the voluntary carbon market. And the Ukrainian crisis increased the concern of companies, of industrial companies, so the will to decarbonize, to de-risk. On one side, they want to de-risk. On the other side, there is a strong volatility on the energy prices, and it's very difficult to have visibility on energy prices in 5-10 years when you look at payback of projects. Okay,
yeah, that's a good point. Camilla, and then Kingsmill.
Well, just on this issue, I mean, again, I have to say, I feel your pain as a fellow investor. Renewable investors going down, it's really annoying. But it's not entirely surprising. Interest rate sensitives in a rising interest rate environment are going to go down. I mean, that's just the nature of investment. So I don't think, in general terms, that we should worry that that's bankrupting the or disrupting the story that we're presenting. I think the other problem we all face is there's a lot of capital coming into this space, and that again chasing returns, and that means that returns not necessarily going to be very good. But as some of my fellow panelists have noted, you will have some amazing winners, right? People who can corner different niches in the market, be it on digitization or grid enhancing technologies or cable technologies, whatever they are, there will be some amazing winners as usual. And then the final point I think we have to make here is there is the other side of the equation, which is the fossil fuel system is incredibly vulnerable. You know, they can't rely upon Putin invading Ukraine every year. And they are facing peaking demand already, and then a plateau till the middle of this decade, and then permanent catastrophic decline. So therefore, I think one of the things that investors now need to do, rather than worrying quite so much about their renewable investments, is worry a lot more about their fossil fuel investments, because that's where the real risk now lies.
Thank you. And I'm going to open up to the audience in a minute, because I'm sure people are edging on their seat to ask you questions. But Camilla, you wanted to contribute to this?
No, coming here today as a technology provider, it's one of the key questions. I wanted to find more answers to what's the reason for the divide. As a technology provider, we work with one leg with the industry. It's a lot of activity. It's a lot of enthusiasm to decarbonize. It's a lot happening. And then on the financing side, it has been, for the last couple of months, almost dead, and for quite some time. And what's the reason for this divide? It was not long ago, I used as an example, I had one of those newsletters for an investment banker which we're working with in one of the markets we are in, bragging about that now it's picking up again. It has been dead, but now it's picking up again. We have raised this and this capital for this and this company. And I'm reading this newsletter, and it's all goes into the oil sector. It's seismic, it's drilling, it's like, and the same, this was on a Sunday. The same Sunday, I received this newsletter from NASA about the state of the rainforest, the state of the coral reefs, and you got this, where's the huge divide? What's wrong in this world? And I heard a brilliant investor this morning saying that the problem is my mandate. I don't have a mandate to invest in clean tech. I have a mandate to generate profitability. That's my problem. And then it has to be something with the business models. Is CO2 not worth anything in that business model? I think the financial actors need to start counting CO2 as we are counting US dollar. It needs to mean something. And the climate risk needs to have a cost in the business model. It's going to be a significant problem. And okay, if we need to start measuring that in US dollar, then that's what we need to do. So of course, you could wish for more value-based financing, but you might put that in the naive and dreaming corner. So value-based financing is not how our world at large operates. So what else can we ask for as a technology provider? I think speed needs to be a decision criteria, and a sharper focus on where do we channel the capital. Because as we heard, we talk a lot about it's hard to abate industry. No, half of the industrial processes, it's easy to abate. We can do it today. It's easy, and it's cheap, and we can compete with gas. So we need to channel the capital to the easy to abate and the low-hanging fruits, which is decarbonize residential heating, decarbonize the easy to abate industry, and decarbonize the electrical vehicle. If we channel the money to that, things are going to start happening.
That's very, very positive. Let me see if there's questions from the audience. I have one here up front why don't we start with this gentleman? I think this microphone probably will work.
Yes.
If you can introduce yourself and keep the question as short as possible.
Laurie Senti from Aliens Trading. So we're a crypto consulting firm and blockchain tech. So we're also aiming to see how blockchain tech can participate in that. One thing that I've listened to is the centralization of creating energy. And that's what we've seen with the war in Ukraine, is that we are really dependent on one country or one part of the world, and that's not good in my sense. And the problem when we're creating electricity is that this is coming mainly from nuclear centrals. And these nuclear centrals, it's also a centralized system. And so what I'm listening here is that we're talking about decarbonization and how we can do that, but is it really electricity? How is electricity being created? And this electricity is not being created without fossil fuels. It's mainly today being created with fossil fuels, especially in Germany with coal. And so I'm not sure about if this decarbonization is the right way of doing things, and I'm asking what is then coming. I mean, can we maybe create electricity only with solar panels and wind? But it's not ready today. So how can we face that and this point of view?
Thank you very much. That's clear. Thank you. Yes, sir.
Marc Dauvant, Lombard-Odier. We spoke so far, or I heard on the upstream side, the downstream. What I'm interested is in the middle part, the distribution. And I remember we saw a page with a grid in the middle. And from my limited understanding, there's a challenge of take wind power being generated on the Atlantic coast, the North Sea, but how do you bring that to the core industrial areas in the German rural or Paris area? So my challenges are, how do we address that, challenge, technically or in terms of, and second, who's going to pay for that, public or private?
That's a very good question. Thank you. Let's see if I have a third question before I go back. Yes, ma'am, there with the brown jacket. Yes.
I don't have a mic, but I can speak.
Oh, shout. We'll hear you.
So the conference is also about sustainable finance. I would like to hear you explain how you incorporate and anticipate the extraction of rare earth minerals and materials to actually make batteries in your projects of electrification.
That's great. Thank you. Three very interesting questions.
Sorry, just one very small additional question. The smallest question. Do we have enough copper to do that?
Great. Okay. Rare earths and copper. Okay, so we had a question about decentralized energy sources and whether they can be a solution. We had a question about the grid and who's going to build it and pay for it. And then we have a question about rare earth and copper. Do we have enough to make batteries? Who wants to tackle the first one about decentralized systems? Iberdrola, do you sell decentralized systems?
Sure, happy to do that. So first, we are truly building a decentralized system because if you think about the system we had 20 years ago, it was coal power plants, it was starting combined cycles and very small wind farms. What we have today in many countries, it's true that Germany is already still burning coal, but what we have in Spain today, we have closed almost all our coal power plants, so there is no more over there. We have CCGTs, but we have created a set of power generation plants all over the country. So we have, don't know, if before we have 30 locations where we generated power, now we have 300. So this is a decentralized. So decentralized is not only about rooftop solar, that we also do have, but it's about distributing all this, because renewable sources, by its nature, it's distributed along the geography. So, and it's not only about centralized generation of electricity, it's also about centralized resources. So before in the fossil fuel industry, we have a number of countries that has those resources, and now renewables has many resources. So the new system, the new energy system that we are building with this energy transition, it's a system that is by nature totally decentralized. So how we can, let's say, assure this system? Well, with the help of digitalization that we have there and the incorporation of new codes of grids and so forth, I think we are able to manage that. And yes, in 2005, we thought that only 20% of the system could be renewable, and no more than that. And now in Spain, we have 80 days and weeks of 80, 60, 70%, and everything is working very well. So there is no problem on that, and we are working on that very well.
Which actually brings us to the grid. And what kind of grid do we need in order to accommodate this new energy system? Who wants to tackle the grid question?
Well, I can tackle the question that you raised about how do you get these big projects done, right? Whether it's the grid, whether it's getting to 3x clean power by 2030. And this is where, we have to step back and really look at multi-sectoral collaboration. What is it going to take for us to get to that next level? And the types of projects that have been done until now are not the type of projects that are going to get us to where we need to be for 2030, 2050. So we can talk about the demand side transformation that needs to happen, but if that supply side is not meeting us, we're not achieving the goals. And so, I don't know, when I look at the North Sea project, I mean, that type of project needs to be replicated elsewhere in the world. These large-scale, complex, capital-intensive projects are going to need to be solved for. And that's bringing together governments with OEMs, with traditional energy players, with the renewable players, and then looping in the industrial clusters and the ports, and really tackling those challenges from a multi-stakeholder perspective. It's not going to be an easy task, but I think the North Sea is a lighthouse to look at and to follow and see what we can learn from it and how it can be replicated.
Thank you, Kristen.
So I think I could, if you like, comment on a couple of these points with some numbers. So just on the grid issue, it's not easy building grids, as we all know. But let's step back for a moment. Put yourself in 1900. There are no grids. And nobody has electricity outside a few lucky people in specific cities. And over the following century, we built 80 million kilometers of grid from a standing start. Now we need, according to the IEA, to build 2 million kilometers of grid per annum, which is difficult. But we are building 1.9. We're 95% of the way there. So I think we need to put these questions in context. It's very, very hard to do what we're doing, but it's also totally achievable. Then, if I may, to address this point about copper and rare earths and nature, again, let's be clear. Fossil fuels, we burn 15,000 million tons a year, and we pour 34,000 million tons of pollution, carbon dioxide, into the air with our fossil fuel system every single year. And the next year we come back and we do it again. If you have a renewable system, you're going to get your energy from the sun and from wind. It's much lighter and it's continuous, so you're swapping stock for a flow. The numbers to bear in mind is you're comparing 15,000 million tons of fossil fuels with 35 million tons of critical minerals, according to the IEA, so 400 times less. So the impact of a renewable system upon nature, don't listen to the sort of fake fossil fuel arguments, is dramatically lower than the impact of a renewable system upon nature. And then coming to the specific points about rare earth minerals, actually, Amory Lovins, our founder, wrote a piece about rare earth minerals about 5 years ago. You remember there was a big panic about rare earth minerals in 2011 when the Chinese, well, 2014, when the Chinese cut off supply, and didn't we have enough? And the answer was, it's just like anything else in commodity markets. Somebody cuts off supply. Rare earths turn out not, in fact, to be that rare. Other people start producing them, and then prices come down again, and the Chinese eventually came back into the market. So, the IEA and Joule and IRENA and many people have analyzed whether or not we have enough minerals to drive the energy transition. We get the same answer from all of them, which is plenty in the Earth's crust. As with anything, if you move from relatively small amounts to with exponential growth, which we're on, you're going to have teething troubles, right? There will be moments or years where you've more supply, so more demand than supply. But the answer to that is not to say we can't do it. The answer is to figure out solutions. And those solutions include, for example, circularity, a massive increase in circularity. They include efficiency, not being so incredibly inefficient with this stuff as we have been in the past. They include taking care of nature and not trashing nature in the way we have done previously. I could completely agree with the point. We shouldn't be. We now have enough resources to do this thing better this time. So I mean, the answer really is, if you do stuff right, we have plenty of minerals, and it's not going to act as a serious impediment to the energy transition. If you get it wrong, and you don't recycle, and you don't increase efficiency, and you don't innovate and get, for example, as Elon Musk is doing, get cobalt out of your batteries, then sure, we're going to struggle. But we can do this thing.
Yeah, for the question about the grids, for sure, you need to invest in grids heavily, and the companies, private companies, we are willing to invest in that, and we think this is a good opportunity. But one thing very important, these massive investments that are needed for grids, the grids are meant to last for 50, 60 years. So we have conducted some research about what is the impact in the customer of these massive investments in grids when you get to these renewable systems. And the point is that because of the long duration of these assets, a customer, we made the research for Spain, for Texas, and for Illinois, for different topologies of grids. And the impact is between 1.5 and 2 euros per megawatt hour. Remember the prices that we have of 400 or the prices that we may have today of 100. So the investments in the grids for the customers will have a very, very low impact. So we are ready to invest. The investments needed are very high, but the impact in the customer is going to be very low. And I would say the problem is not the investment and the problem is not the cost that we'll have into the customers. The problem is permitting and how we can get through the permitting processes to bring that energy to the customers. But as Casimir said, we have proved that we are able to electrify our cities, and we are very happy with that, and we can build more. And there is technology like HVDC or direct current that can go into the low level to increase the level of electrification of the economy. So there is no technical problems, there is no resource problem, there is no investment problem, and there is no problem for the customer. So don't think this is a problem for the energy transition. Grids is not the problem.
Thank you. Visa?
Yes, just to comment on copper. You see many studies saying, oh, there will be probably not enough copper. But you have to think, the question is valid because in new economies, you have to invest massively in copper because you have no recycled materials. In mature economy, it's a bit different. A few things, I think we look at the problem of copper with narrow eyes because in fact, copper is in many sectors. Like piping, water piping in some countries. So you need to look at the problem in a much wider scope than what you look at. Second, if you look at solar PV Europe, 2/3 of solar PV in Europe is rooftop. So it's both utility scale and rooftop. So the question is how much do you need to transport your electron from your roof to your usage? You do not need to go to the grid. So you think you do not need copper for these electrons, or at least you need less copper on a systemic approach. And last point, I mentioned it earlier, if you do smart thing demand side, you will not have grid congestion because you manage it cleverly. So we will need copper, of course, because we will need to manage this huge growth, but digital will help.
Very good. Okay, we got a minute left. Final question. This is a bit of a game. You have 30 seconds each, and I haven't told them what the question was in advance. Otherwise, it's no fun. So the question is, so Augustine told us that today, demand for energy, 30% electric, 70% fossil fuels, and that needs to switch drastically. So the question for you is, by 2030, in the next 7 years, do you think we're going to go the other way, 70% electricity, 30% fossil fuels? And if yes, what needs to happen? If no, what has failed to happen to get us there? So will we get 70 electricity, 30 fossil fuel in the next 7 years? And what needs to happen for this to actually happen? And you have 20 seconds each. Camilla, yes or no, and what?
I have to say yes, because I cannot say anything else,
Okay,
because
yes.
I'm in there fighting for the electricity, but it's a very hairy goal, and it's a lot that needs to change, and a lot that needs to happen. Sense of urgency in the industry is from my side.
Good. Augustine, yes or no, what needs to happen?
No, it's not going to happen. I mean, this is going to happen in 2050, hopefully, or a bit earlier. And we are building this to take place. But 7 years in a system like the energy system that we have been built for 100 years is a very short period of time. We would love so, and we're working on that, but we need more time.
Misa.
And this is a pity.
Same answer, no in the very short term, but I will invite you to look at the update of the net zero energy scenario of the IEA in 2050. It's insightful. From 2021 to 2030, they added between +5 and +10 points in electrification by 2050. So their vision is really converging toward more and more electricity.
Okay.
70% by 2030, no, I wish. I would love that to happen, but I think that the timeline would be further out. What it would take to get there, I think that it would take, much more concerted effort on the demand side. So transformation of how we consume energy, replacing the processes and machines at the end of life cycle, or sooner, right?
Before the end of the life cycle.
It would have to be before then, because at any time you have the process or the machine, it's not going to be replaced immediately, right? It just, our company's going to do that, industry's going to do that right now. What would be the incentive? So that would need to be fixed on the demand side.
Thank you, Kristen. Kingsmill, you have the last word.
So, the answer is obviously no, but at RMI, we look very, very carefully at S-curves. And what will happen by 2030 is that all new electricity and the majority of new cars will already be renewable and electrified. And therefore, by 2030, you won't have the answer, but you will be able to see it. And I think that's the really important point. Any analyst in 2030 will be able to put into their spreadsheet the share of cars, the share of electricity coming from renewable sources, and the share of heat of new sales. And by that stage, the vast majority will be electrified and renewable, thanks to Siemens and others. At that point, I think you will actually be able to see this promised land of getting to this new world.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much to the panelists, and thank you for the good questions from the audience. Thank you.
Thank you.